us off at number 10 is an abandoned carnival. Now, I have always known carnivals to be very upbeat and happy places, but I think it's safe to say after toxic radiation, they ain't so fun. Just a mile and a quarter away from the Chernobyl power plant is the small town of Pripyat. Pripyat was the town where most workers at Chernobyl lived and raised their families prior to the famous blast. Obviously, that is not the case anymore. What is now left of this once popular carnival is a decaying Ferris wheel, bumper cars surrounded by overgrown vines, and an old rusty skeleton of a merry-go-round. It is said that the amusement park was set to open on May 1st, just 5 days after the Chernobyl incident occurred, but the people of Pripyat needed something to do while the reactor was melting down, so the town opened up the amusement park on April 27th. How charming. Nothing more sweet and fun than you and your family enjoying a beautiful Ferris wheel ride that sweeps in and out of toxic radiation. It's the little things in life.
In our ninth spot today, we have the ghosts. A number of people lost their lives over this terrible disaster, and it's believed that their souls are still around, haunting Pripyat. This one story in particular will give you the chills. It was told by nuclear physicist Andrei Karsukov. He visited the area in 1997 and claims he encountered a ghost. So when he arrived, he went to the power station and went to the number 4 reactor. That's where the explosion occurred. Now, he was there taking radiation readings when all of a sudden he heard someone screaming for rescue from a fire coming from inside. He said that it was impossible for someone to be inside of the old reactor room. For starters, the door requires a password and a handprint. And not only that, it would have tripped an alarm if someone managed to get inside. Yet, the screaming was clearly coming from inside. It sounded like someone was desperately trying to escape. So he might have heard the ghostly cries from someone who lost their life in the power plant explosion. Isn't that scary? I think so.
Number 8, silhouettes of missing townspeople. Before I go any further on this one, let me just say that these silhouettes are not actually of real people left after the blast. A couple of sneaky and daring graffiti artists said to be from Germany and Belarus snuck into the radiation zone and thought it would be a good idea to spray paint silhouettes of people who once lived in this beautiful little community. So these pieces more or less resemble what once was rather than resembling actual humans from the town. That being said, there are some unique silhouettes through the radiation zone, such as a little girl with pigtails reaching for a light switch in a random abandoned room. Somewhere outside, a boy pulling a truck towards a corner of the building, as well as silhouettes of random people dancing, and to finish it off, a small group of children jumping together in terror of the blast. Pretty morbid, if you ask me. Whether these silhouettes are based on specific real people or not, these random silhouettes are definitely a haunting thing to see, and I don't want to see them.
Coming in at number 7, we have the Bloody Red. The Bloody Red, or the Red Forest, is the name given to the forest area around Chernobyl. Why is it called that? Well, this area received a lot of radiation fallout. As a result, the trees turned this bright orange color and then died. Nowadays, not a single tree can grow there anymore. In fact, this area is considered the most radioactive land area on the planet. Yes, on the planet. Obviously, as a result, the 400 hectares of land are off limits. It's strictly prohibited to go in there. I mean, duh, unless you have a death wish and want to die from exposure to radiation. What's also scary is that in 2015, a fire broke out in the forest, and even more radioactive material was released from this burning. So yeah, that forest is a big no-go zone. Also, could they have given it a creepier name, like the Bloody Red? Really? Really?
Coming in at number 6 are piles of creepy dolls. Creepy dolls! I have seen plenty of horror films in my time, and nothing creeps me out more than a creepy, probably possessed old doll. All through Pripyat, piles of dolls and doll heads can be seen in the randomest of places. Everywhere from windowsills, piles of debris, bed frames, tree branches, literally everywhere. Now, some of these dolls may be left over from the blast, but odds are they are all placed there by cheeky horror fans wanting to place their own touch on the Chernobyl site. Some of these are even propped up in specific poses with gas masks on. Annabelle, if you're watching this, you stay in your glass box. You got that?
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Hospital of Death. This is said to be the deadliest hospital on the planet. So after the nuclear disaster, this hospital began quickly filling up with a number of sick and injured citizens. Nowadays though, obviously the hospital is abandoned. But the basement of the hospital contains a dark secret. In the basement, there are piles of first responders' clothing. These clothings belong to the first responders like the firemen who were on the scene immediately after the explosion. Obviously, the clothing they wore when they rushed into the building is now highly contaminated, and still to this day emit dangerously high levels of radiation. So they were just dumped in the basement because they didn't know where else to get rid of it. In fact, the radiation in this building is 4,000 times higher than normal. It's crazy.
Number 4, radiation-eating fungus. In the words of Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way. Currently, there is a fungus growing inside the damaged 4th reactor of Chernobyl where radiation levels are still insanely high. Discovered by scientists back in 2002, this fungus, when tested, showed that when exposed to higher ionizing radiation, it would actually grow faster. What happened to the tested fungus after? Who knows? Either way, I do wish I could have been there to test it with the other scientists because I hear they were some pretty fun guys. I'll show myself out.
In our third spot today, we have the mutated animals. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster had devastating, lasting effects. The nuclear material leaked into the soil, contaminating food and water. In fact, the radioactive materials leaked into pastures and was eaten by cows, and then was later found in their milk that children were drinking. But let's talk more about these farm animals that were affected. There were tons of weird mutated animals born near the disaster zone after this incident. Pigs, goats, and horses were born with messed up faces and extra limbs, or were just weird colors. Nowadays, there's a lot of stray dogs that roam the area. Sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life, and they may have a number of health issues.
Coming in at number 2 is quite possibly the strangest but most obvious thing you will find in all of Chernobyl. Tourists! Apparently, around 12,000 tourists visit the exclusion zone every single year. One tourism company promises 11 hours of excitement with a respirator and a dosimeter included. There are even some nearby hotels that request you leave your radioactive shoes outside and don't bring them into the hotel with you once you return. No matter how safe or unsafe you think it is to visit the exclusion zone, quite obviously thousands of people from around the world go and visit every single year. Honestly, it does seem kind of cool, and I'm sure there's a gift shop somewhere that sells shirts that say, I went all the way to Chernobyl and all I got was this shirt and an extra thumb. I'd buy that. Hey Lindsay, you want to go to Chernobyl with me?
No.
Okay.
And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. This is absolutely insane. I don't think you guys are ready for this one. But the Stalkers is the name given to a group of Russians and Ukrainians that romanticize the apocalyptic environment of Pripyat. They sneak into abandoned buildings and explore them. Sometimes they even sleep over there. Also, to make matters weirder, they bring a gauger counter to see how much radiation they were exposed to on their journeys. Not only that, but apparently they also like to eat the fruit that grows in the danger zone. Like, this is their definition of fun, and they just love it. I highly recommend you don't do this, for a number of obvious reasons. But like I said, the Stalkers love this. Starting off this countdown, we have the residents. Believe it or not, but there are people that still live in Chernobyl, even though it's highly dangerous to do so. It's estimated that there are around 130 to 150 people currently living there. Many of them are older women. In fact, they have been given the name Chernobyl's babushkas. Now, you may be wondering, how do they live there when there's no operating grocery store and stuff like that? Well, they live off of the land. They are still farming their family's land. The thing is, the water and soil there is still highly contaminated. So why would they take this risk? Well, one of the elderly ladies featured in a documentary about Chernobyl's babushkas said, and I quote, "Radiation doesn't scare me, starvation does." After the nuclear disasters, these ladies fled their home, but over the years they have all come back. Despite there being no hospitals or grocery stores, they don't care. They just want to be on their homeland. And turns out their bodies have somewhat adjusted to the high levels of radiation there. In our 9th spot, we have the radioactive animals. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up. The nuclear power plant explosion had a lasting effect on the animals in the area. First off, families families had to flee their home and leave their pets behind. As a result, a number of stray dogs that are descendants of those dogs still roam the area. But it's not safe to pet them, no matter how cute they are. And sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life. And many of them have health issues. Another animal that is highly radioactive there are the boars. This is because they eat grubs, tubers, and roots in the soil where the radioactive isotopes have settled. Not only that, but birds and rodents have been found with tumors and cataracts, all from being exposed to the radiation in the area. Coming in at number 8, we have the creepy doll beds. There are a bunch of people who go around Chernobyl purposely trying to make it creepier. They have been given the name the disaster tourists. They have been known to take creepy old dolls and place them on windowsills or hang them from buildings, etc. They also did this really creepy thing in an abandoned school. They rearranged a kindergarten classroom and placed a doll on every single one of those dilapidated beds. That literally looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Seriously, out of all the abandoned places there, that one looks like it would for sure be haunted. In our 7th spot today, we have the ghostly figure. There are tons of ghosts that haunt Chernobyl. I mean, any place where a huge tragedy takes place is bound to be haunted. In this case, the ghost was captured on live TV. So Sci-Fi Channel's Destination Truth went to Chernobyl and conducted a number of paranormal investigations. They even went to Reactor 4. While there, they saw a human figure appear on a thermal imaging camera. They believe that that is the soul of a worker that died from the explosion. They also checked out a number of abandoned hospitals and saw multiple figures moving throughout the hospital on the thermal imaging camera as well. Isn't that spooky? Moving on to number 6, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a large mass of black coria. It's given the name the elephant's foot because it's shaped sort of like an elephant's foot. Now, this thing is highly deadly. It emits high levels of radiation. Anyone exposed to it for minutes could die from radiation poisoning. And guess what? Although it's not as active as it was back in the day, it is still generating heat and still melting down into the base of Chernobyl. The scariest part, if it comes in contact with water, another explosion could occur. Now, eventually the elephant's foot will cool on its own, but even then it will still remain highly radioactive. And no one should ever go near it. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the raccoon dog. This is a really freaking weird animal found in Chernobyl. When people first saw it, they actually thought the radiation caused a dog and a raccoon to just fuse together. Basically, they are found all throughout the exclusion zone, and they are thriving there. It's crazy to see how they have adapted to live in a highly radioactive area. Now, these things are freaking cute. In fact, they are the most observed animals in that area by scientists. Coming in at number 4, we have the firebugs. These are tiny but deadly radioactive bugs. They were discovered back in 2011 when 2 friends were out collecting flowers in the exclusion zone. Don't worry, they were doing this for scientific reasons, to study the pollen, not to just create a deadly radioactive bouquet of flowers. Anyways, while doing so, they came across these firebugs. They then went around collecting hundreds of these bugs, some from areas with higher levels of radiation and some from areas with lower radiation levels. In the end, they found that those exposed to higher levels of radiation had deformities. I mean, yeah, just as you suspected. Either way, you don't want those bad boys crawling on your skin for a number of reasons. In our 3rd spot today, we have the mutated wolves. The wolves from Chernobyl are another animal that are most commonly studied by scientists. In fact, some have been tagged with GPS collars to help track the levels of radioactivity there. Here's the thing. There was this whole scary legend going around that the wolves living there got mutated and were now highly aggressive and massive in size. There were stories being told of these massive wolves hunting down humans and attacking any and every animal. Turns out that this was false. But here's something interesting. Scientists believe that the wolves there have been mating with the dogs there. And in the end, they are creating these large dogs that look like wolves. It's pretty interesting. I want a wolf dog. Another interesting thing is that research has shown that the radiation isn't really affecting them. In fact, the wolf population is thriving there. As a result, they have concluded that humans have a greater negative impact on animals' lives than radiation does. Isn't that insane? It is said that there are around 300 wolves living in the exclusion zone. But again, like all the animals mentioned on this list, they are highly radioactive and dangerous to get close to or even pet. Coming in at number 2, we have the toons. victims. This is one of the saddest things at Chernobyl. But basically, a number of individuals that got exposed to the radioactive materials and died had to be buried in basically a big concrete coffin. Let's take a look at a man named Vasily Ignatenko. On that day, he went to the roof of the power plant to extinguish the fires. Sadly, he was exposed to a lethal dose of radiation and passed away. He was only 25. Now, his body was still radioactive. So Vasily, along with 27 other firefighters, were buried under big amounts of zinc and concrete. They did this to protect the public from the radiation emitting from their bodies. They were buried all around the reactor. It's really sad that they didn't really get a proper burial. I mean, they couldn't. It was too dangerous to go near their bodies. And in our number one spot today, we have the Blackbird of Chernobyl. According to some survivors of this accident, they claim that shortly before the nuclear plant meltdown, they all experienced nightmares. They also received threatening phone calls and had encountered a huge winged bird creature. Legend goes that these were all warning signs that the disaster was going to happen. The creature they saw was a large creature like a man with huge wings and red eyes. Some even claim they saw it over one of the reactors as it went through the meltdown. This creature has been given the name the Blackbird of Chernobyl. So legend goes, if you were in Chernobyl and you see this creature, then something bad is going to happen. Alright, starting off this countdown, we have the sarcophagus. Basically, this is a massive steel and concrete structure that covers the Chernobyl power plant. It was designed to help contain the radiation. The construction of the structure lasted for 206 days, and those working on it had to work in shifts of no more than 7 minutes. Any more time spent near the reactors would have killed them. But still, they did sacrifice their lives building this because thousands of workers still died from exposure to the radiation. Those that survived got severely ill, and majority of them developed cancer. Nowadays, the sarcophagus is still there, but it's beginning to crumble. In 2019, they were in the process of dismantling it because it was going to collapse. So a new one is currently being installed. That's probably the scariest thing in Chernobyl because of how deadly the building it's containing is. Coming in at number 9, we have the gas masks. And if you guys are liking this video or want to see part 3, then smash that like button. Chernobyl already looks like the place where an apocalypse occurred. Buildings are completely abandoned, run down, and overgrown with nature. What doesn't help is the piles upon piles of gas masks scattered all throughout Chernobyl. This really adds to the eeriness of this place. And again, makes it look like a place where a zombie or alien takeover occurred. In fact, there is one room inside a school which is just completely filled with child-sized gas masks. It's very creepy, but also sad. Like, imagine how frightened the young children were when this happened. The gas masks found there are just a sad reminder of the horrors that took place there when the reactor exploded. Moving on to number 8, we have the rotting toys. Littered all throughout the city are toys or personal belongings people had to leave behind. The saddest thing to see are pictures of children's toys left behind. Like, I just think that was probably someone's favorite little dolly. Go anywhere there and you'll find items scattered everywhere, now broken and covered in filth. Like, imagine you're rushed out of your home and have to leave behind all your personal belongings. That must have been so hard. I can't imagine how everyone must have felt. It's really depressing to think about. Moving on at number 7, we have the examination chair. So this one is pretty strange, but somehow a gynecologist examination chair ended up in the middle of the woods outside of a hospital. Not only is that super weird, but it's also super creepy. It's all rusted and beat up and looks like an old torture device. Not only that, but that means someone had to go inside the abandoned hospital, find that chair, and then carry it all the way back down and into the woods. I got a lot of questions. Why would someone do this? And how long did it take them to do this? And again, why would someone do this? Either way, it makes for a very spooky encounter. Moving on at number 6, we have the abandoned cooling tower. A partially constructed cooling tower can be found at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They were built to evaporate the cooling water from the 2 new reactors. Sadly, they were never completed. Now, these things are massive. The diameter was over 120 meters and it stands at 150 meters tall. Obviously, after the accident, there was no need to continue on with the construction of this, so the government just left the towers there along with everything else. Eventually, over time, nature will have its way with it and it will start to erode and crumble. It's just crazy seeing all these abandoned infrastructures. Imagine how life would have been if that explosion never happened. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the toxic river. There's a river that's just filled with radioactive water right near the reactor. The scariest part is, despite how toxic the water is, a bunch of aquatic life live there. In particular, giant catfish. Yes, giant catfish. A video from 2016 shows a massive catfish swimming in the water. People originally were like, oh my god, what the heck is that? It must be some sort of mutated animal. Later, it was just found out to be a giant catfish. But still, what the heck? And it's the fact that they have adapted to be able to survive in that highly toxic water. Like, that just baffles me. Not only that, but they can thrive there because the water has no higher predators. Obviously though, you're not allowed to go fishing there. Okay, I feel like that's a given, but I also feel like people would still try it, so I'm just gonna say it. Don't go fishing there. In our 4th spot, we have the jarfish. Speaking of fish, we're gonna go with this. So back in 2016, photographer and journalist Miriam Wazer took a trip to explore the ruins of Chernobyl. While inside an abandoned building, she came across something very creepy and odd. She found a bunch of fish and other specimens in jars. Why someone was collecting fish, it just baffles many. And they weren't even like proper beakers or science mason jars. No, it looked like someone emptied out their jar of pickles and then used it to store the specimen. I think it's best if those remain untouched. Like, can you imagine how stinky they would be if they were open nowadays? They would reek. Old stinky fish is not something I would ever want to handle. Now, the other specimen beside the fish are unknown. No one knows what the heck they are. But if you know, let me know in the comments below. Coming in at number 3, we have the abandoned hospitals. The hospitals at Chernobyl are quite eerie. They're just filled with rusted, empty hospital beds, littered syringes, and more. The walls and floors are cracking, and there's dirt and questionable red marks on the floor. I think the saddest thing though is that these hospitals are often trashed with medical supplies just tossed everywhere. The days after the explosion happened, people were frantically rushing to hospitals. Hospital staff were overwhelmed by the amount of people there. This moment is still preserved in the hospitals to this day. It's pretty dark once you think about it. And at number 2 today, we have the Sad Alley. The Sad Alley, or the Alley of Memory, is an alley in the Ukraine created in memory of the villages and residents who had to flee from their homes during the disaster. Basically, it's a walkway with signs lining the sides. These signs are names of cities and villages that had to evacuate and leave everything behind. It's a way to ensure we just never forget the impact that this disaster had. It's really sad. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the radioactive spiders. Yes, you heard me correctly. Imagine if Peter Parker got bit by one of these bad guys. He'd be like a weirdly mutated Spider-Man or something like that. But anyways, the spiders in the exclusion zone are radioactive. So you definitely don't want to be bit by one. Oh wait, it gets worse. They also make radioactive webs. Yeah, you heard me, that's a thing. So you don't have to just worry about these spiders, but you have to worry about walking through their deadly webs. Like, what the heck? No thank you. Nuh-uh. I'm not a fan of spiders, but imagine radioactive ones. That sounds like it belongs in a horror movie. Radioactive, radioactive.